was June 1st, 1921, America's Black Wall Street. The name given to one of the most affluent all-black communities in America was bombed from the air and burned to the ground by mobs of envious whites. In a period spanning fewer than 12 hours, a once thriving black business district in northern Tulsa lay smoldering. A model community destroyed and a major black American economic movement diffused. The night's carnage left some 3,000 black Americans dead and over 600 successful businesses lost. Among these were 21 churches, 21 restaurants, 30 grocery stores, and 2 movie theaters, plus a hospital, a bank, a post office, libraries, schools, law offices, a half dozen private airplanes, and even a bus system. As could have been expected, the impetus behind it all was the infamous Ku Klux Klan, working together with ranking city officials and many other lawmakers. The best description of Black Wall Street would be to compare it to a mini Beverly Hills. It was the golden door of the black community during the early 1900s, and it proved that black Americans do create successful infrastructures. That's what Black Wall Street was all about. The dollar circulated 36 to 1,000 times, sometimes taking a year before the currency would leave the community. Today, a dollar leaves the black community in 30 minutes. As far as resources, there were PhDs residing there, black attorneys and doctors. One doctor was Dr. Berry, who owned the bus system. His average income was $500 a day, a fairly large income for 1910. During that time, physicians owned medical schools. There were also pawn shops, jewelry stores, churches, restaurants, and movie theaters. It was a time when the entire state of Oklahoma only had 2 airports, yet 6 blacks owned their own planes. It was a very fascinating community. The area encompassed 600 businesses in a 30-block area, with a population of 15,000 black Americans. And when the lower economic Europeans looked over and seen what was done, many were jealous. When the average student went to school, he wore a suit and tie because of the morals taught at a very young age. The mainstay of the community was to educate every child. Strong community relationships was very important and is missing today. The main thoroughfare was Greenwood Avenue, and it was intersected by Archer and Pine Streets. From the first letters of each of these 3 names, you get GAP, and that's where the renowned R&B music group, the Gap Band, got its name. They're from Tulsa. Black Wall Street was a prime example of the typical black community in America that did business, but it was in an unusual location. You see, at the time, Oklahoma was set aside to be a black and Indian state. There were over 28 black townships there. 1/3 of the people who traveled in the terrifying Trails of Tears alongside the Indians between 1830 and 1842 were black people. The citizens of this proposed Indian and black state chose a black governor, a treasurer from Kansas named McDade. But the Ku Klux Klan said that if he assumed office, they'd kill him within 48 hours. A lot of blacks owned farmland, and many of them had gone into the oil business. The community was so tight and wealthy because they traded dollars hand to hand, and because they were dependent upon one another as a result of the Jim Crow laws. It was not unusual that if a resident's home accidentally burned down, it could be rebuilt within a few weeks. By neighbors, this was the type of scenario that was going on day to day on Black Wall Street. When blacks intermarried into the Indian culture, some of them did receive their promised 40 acres and a mule, and with that came whatever oil later found on the property. On Black Wall Street, a lot of global business was conducted. The community flourished from the early 1900s until June 1st, 1921. That's when the largest massacre of non-military Americans in the history of this country took place, and it was led by the Ku Klux Klan. Imagine walking out of your front door and seeing 1,500 homes being burned. It must have been scary and heartbreaking all at one time. Survivors that were interviewed think that the whole thing was planned because during the time all this was going on, white families with their children stood around the borders of the community and watched the massacre, the looting and everything, much in the same manner they would watch a lynching. The riots wasn't caused by anything but jealousy. A lot of white folks had come back from World War I and they were poor. When they looked over into the black communities and realized that black men who fought in the war had come home heroes, that helped trigger the destruction. It cost the black community everything, and not a single dime of restitution. No insurance claims has been awarded to the victims to this day. It's estimated that 1,500 to 3,000 people were killed, and we know that a lot of them were buried in mass graves all around the city. Some were thrown into the river. As a matter of fact, at 21st and Yale Street, where now stands a Sears parking lot, that corner used to be a coal mine. They threw a lot of bodies into the shafts. Our mandate now is to teach our children the truth about our rich and noble heritage, not just to portray slaves as the system does so passionately. We can rebuild America's Black Wall Street, but it won't be easy without the correct people coming together as one, acknowledging God as the head. Racism is a money-making system for America, from economics, education, entertainment, along with these immoral laws in place today. It's time to stop letting the system play us like a piano and take control of our future. Today, it is estimated that black spending power is $1 trillion. It is also estimated that the $1 trillion lead the black community in 30 minutes, while other cultures within America spend their money multiple times before it leaves this country. Black people's money changes hands with other black-owned enterprises less than one time. We have been conditioned to believe black-owned businesses owe us more than great service if we patronize them. Otherwise, we won't, unless it's a beauty shop, barber shop, hip-hop club, or liquor store. More black dollars change hands to drug dealers and bootleggers of audio and movie CDs and brand-name handbags than to legitimate black-owned businesses. The black community is dying. We have gotten caught up in the illusion of a fake American dream by trusting a system ordained purposely to cause you to fail. It has caused us to forget about business ownership, and it has our children's future in jeopardy. We need to get real serious about business ownership all across this nation. We also need to become better educated on our true, rich, noble heritage. Most have accepted the conditioning of the mind through false media and other worldly systems, which has stopped us from joining together unless a major tragedy takes place. It's time to stand up and be accountable and grateful for our ancestors' sacrifice and our children's future. It's up to us to give them back their true heritage, history, and culture of unity and trust. It's up to us to rebuild America's Black Wall Street all across this nation by using what other cultures have built wealth on generations after generation. In 2011, there were 135,000 Black Americans who died. If we understood human capital, each one would have a minimum of $250,000 in coverage, which could have yielded close to $73 billion into the black community. That's how we rebuild Black Wall Street.
As far back as the 1920s, when he began as FBI director, Hoover had gone after persons like Marcus Garvey. Garvey's organization, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, had a membership numbering in the millions, and somehow Hoover found this threatening and worthy of surveillance and undermining attempt. So it is small wonder that the civil rights movement was also subjected to heavy attack by Hoover. Billions of government dollars were spent in this direction. Many of these activities were not only unwarranted, but of questionable legality.
You take Martin Luther King, that is being led by communists all over this great country, feels that he has the key to the White House. He has the telephone call to the White House that can get anything he wanted.
I spoke for the white people. The white people rallied behind it, and we kicked the living hell out of the niggers, sent the out-of-town niggers to the hospital and out of the state, put back to their own hometowns where they ought to have been, and the niggers in St. Augustine got quiet and went back over to Nigger Town where they belong.
Well, I've just gotten through a couple of weeks ago with a 45 or 46-day battle of Ingram Park, I call it. That's the park there in Birmingham where we stopped Martin Luther King. And I mean, ladies and gentlemen, we had that nigger whipped.
Congress passes the most sweeping civil rights bill ever to be written into the law, and thus reaffirms the conception of equality for all men that began with Lincoln and the Civil War 100 years ago. The Negro won his freedom then. He wins his dignity now. 5 hours after the House passes the measure, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is signed at the White House by President Johnson. Before an audience of legislators and civil rights leaders who had labored long and hard for passage of the bill, President Johnson calls for all Americans to back what he calls a turning point in history.
We must not approach the observance and enforcement of this law in a vengeful spirit. Its purpose is not to punish. Its purpose is not to divide, but to end divisions, divisions which have lasted all too long. Its purpose is national, not regional. This Civil Rights Act is a challenge to all of us to go to work in our communities and our states, in our homes and in our hearts, to eliminate the last vestiges of injustice in our beloved country. So, tonight I urge every public official, every religious leader, every business and professional man, every working man, every housewife. I urge every American to join in this effort to bring justice and hope to all our people and to bring peace to our land.
There's warm applause from members of both parties as the president sets to work. It is work. He uses nearly 100 pens to affix his signature and date. Souvenirs go to Republican leader Everett Dirksen and Democratic whip Hubert Humphrey. The president seems to have mastered the art of just touching each pen to the paper. Integration leader Martin Luther King receives his pen, a gift he said he would cherish. The Department of Justice will enforce the law if necessary, and G-Man Chief J. Edgar Hoover is present. Another group of pens is reserved for the Kennedys, and the Attorney General is entrusted with a half dozen. Now, in this summer of 1964, the Civil Rights Bill is the law of the land. In the words of the President, it restricts no one's freedom so long as he respects the rights of others.
Any black leader with charisma was a target of the government's COINTELPRO program. And that's stated in their own objectives of the program.
Who are you? You don't know. Don't tell me Negro, that's nothing. What were you before the white man named you a Negro? And where were you? And what did you have? What was yours? What language did you speak then? What was your name? It couldn't have been Smith or Jones or Bunch or Powell. That wasn't your name. They don't have those kind of names where you and I came from. No, what was your name? And why don't you now know what your name was then? Where did it go? Where did you lose it? Who took it? And how did he take it? What tongue did you speak? How did the man take your tongue? Where is your history? How did the man wipe out your history? What did the man do to make you as dumb?
We can't prove for sure that the FBI COINTELPRO program or an agent of the FBI actually killed Malcolm X. They were certainly trying to reach that end. They were articulating that goal, and they were taking steps in furtherance of that, trying to cause the exact same thing to happen which happened. So we can step back from it and say, regardless of their success, whether they were the ones who pulled the trigger, this gives us an idea of what their intent was, what they were willing to do, what their political viewpoint was, and what ends, and what unconstitutional and violent ends they were willing to adopt and use in order to reach their goal, which was to destroy progressive movements.
Today I want to say to the people of America and the nations of the world that we are not about to turn around. Yes, sir. We are on the move now. Yes, sir. Yes, we're on the move, and no wave of racism can stop us. Yes, sir.
So again, we cannot say for sure that James Earl Ray was working for the FBI. What we can say for sure is that the FBI had an intent shown by their programs against Dr. King, showed by the document I talked about preventing the rise of messiahs like Dr. King, that they wanted that to happen, and that they had again taken very active steps to do that. So then when Dr. King is killed a month after this document comes out, and after all of the attempts to get him to discredit him and to disrupt his organization, and in fact to have him do physical violence to himself and have others do physical violence to him, I mean, it becomes almost irrelevant whether they pulled the trigger or not. Because we know that they did pull the trigger on Fred Hampton.
We have to defend ourselves. We intend to defend ourselves. We did so in the past, and we're going to do it today, and the day after that, and the day after that. Because only through this proper example of the self-defense and the proper example of retaliation, and by letting these people know that we move from some basic laws, that anything that goes down on the oppressed people, on the part of the oppressor, it should be reciprocal. And in plain proletarian workers' language, it takes two to tango. As soon as these motherfuckers go, we go.
Fred Hampton was only 20 years old, but he had the ability to really move people, to speak in a way that got people going, that effectively seemed to energize them.
People learn by example. I don't think anybody has an argument with that. I think that when Huey P. Newton said that people learn basically by observation and participation, I think that everybody caught on to that. So what we're saying very simply is that if they learn by observation and participation, that we need to do more acting than we need to do writing. And I think the Black Panther Party is doing that. That we didn't talk about a Breakfast for Children program, we've got one. We're not going to tell you how many kids we intend to feed in Chicago. We're feeding 3,000 to 4,000 every week already, and I don't know how many all around the country. We're not talking about beginning to think about treating people free when they need medical services. We're opening a free health clinic in the city of Chicago in less than 3 weeks. These are the type of examples that people can relate to.
Ed Hanrahan, who was the political heir apparent of Mayor Daley, wanted to take credit for having killed this Black Panther leader. So he went on television, and he went on television explaining how Fred Hampton had come out of his bedroom firing a pistol, and how all the Panthers inside had repeatedly broken ceasefires and repeatedly fired at the police. The problem is when you fire a bullet, two things happen. You have a shell that comes from your gun, and you have a bullet that comes out the other end. When the evidence was all gathered, it turned out that all the shells that were found in the apartment came from police weapons, with the possible exception of one. All the bullet holes, the directions of those bullet holes, were all coming inside from outside. That is, showed that they were fired by the police. So that all of the evidence that Hanrahan said, all the evidence that was gathered proved that it was the police who fired, not the Panthers. Hanrahan went even further and actually pointed to places on the back door, which he said were evidence in pictures that the Panthers fired. The press themselves, when they looked closely at these pictures and returned to the scene, discovered that these were in fact nail heads and weren't bullet holes at all. The federal government at first appeared to be coming in and do a neutral investigation. And what the federal government did find, of course, was that it was the police and not the Panthers who had fired. Well, under their cover, though, the federal government, under the cover of appearing neutral, the federal government hid their own role, which was that it was their informant who had gotten a floor plan of the apartment, and their informant had given their floor plan to Ed Hanrahan's raiders. There had been a systematic effort by the FBI in Chicago and nationally to destroy the Panthers. Previously, the FBI in Chicago had sent a letter to the head of the El Rukns, Jeff Fort, telling him the Panthers were trying to assassinate him. Didn't he want to take some action to prevent that? They had deliberately attempted to provoke things between the Panthers and other groups and attempted to discredit the Panthers publicly.
They didn't have to kill every leader. All they had to do was kill one of the most important and up-and-coming and messianic leaders who was doing what Fred Hampton was doing, to send the message to all those young folks, whether they be black or white or Latin or whatever, who wanted to get involved in the struggle, that these are, this is the game that you're getting involved in. We'll kill you in your bed.
I think during different periods the government uses different tactics, you know, and sometimes their methods will be to publicly discredit groups, to jail people. We saw that sometimes with regard to the Wobblies, they actually did kill people. We saw with regard to the Communist Party, they frequently would jail people or attempt to ruin their reputations. I think with regard to the black movement in particular, the escalation of the government's attacks was very clear. And I think assassination, setting people up for internecine rivalries which could lead to deaths, I think the government has shown a willingness to use any form of violence that it felt was necessary.
What are we fighting for? The love of freedom cause, and we've got to win. Repression, in the air. Repression, everywhere.
In the summer of 1978, I interviewed a man who worked as an informer for the FBI during the 1960s. His name is Dothard Perry, also known as Ed Riggs, also known as Bill Perry, also known as Othello. How were you paid?
The pay was always in cash. Cash, and you would sign a card. It would go like this. A rendezvous or a drop-off point would be picked out either by yourself or the agent. You would meet the agent there. Usually it would be in a vehicle. You get in the vehicle, he would hand you the money. He would tell you first to count the money. He would tell you the amount while you counted it. If the amount was there, he would then bring out a card. On that card would be for the week of such and such. In other words, the week was dated. So-and-so has been paid the amount of. I suffer from the fact that a lot of people trusted me, and I misused that trust. I suffer from the fact that a lot of information that I gave out was the undoing of certain groups or certain people.
Why have you decided to talk to me?
For the simple reason, I think this information should be getting out, should be put out to the public. I think not only black people, but everyone should become aware of what your so-called law enforcement agencies do to so-called enforce the law. Because between you, myself, and the audience, I've seen more felons in law enforcement than I have in prison.
You also were active in the infiltration of many cultural groups. Before we go into that step by step, how much research and study did the FBI engage in of black culture in the late 60s?
A great amount.
Give me an idea.
From the thing is, I can, they have a file on every type of magazine that blacks read. They have a file on the music.
Music?
Music, dance, theater, actors, comedians, you name it, man.
And they would actually study these different...
Yes. Oh, yes, definitely.
What would they do with music?
To understand the people, you have to understand the culture.
Tell me about some of the cultural organizations that you infiltrated and what you did.
PASLA, Mafunde, Watts Writers Workshop, which they have...
The Watts Writers Workshop?
Yes. Watts Writers Workshop, which was one of the oldest established black writers workshop.
That place was burned down.
Yeah. The Bureau had it burnt down.
How do you know that?
I know because I participated. I did the arson.
You burned down the Watts Writers?
Yes.
How did you do it?
2 cans of kerosene, Purex bottle, gasoline, and a flare, highway flare.
Why didn't you use more sophisticated stuff?
Oh, no. No. You're never overly sophisticated. It's too obvious. This way you make it look like, you know, maybe somebody in the neighborhood that got kicked out of theater at one time got mad and came and burned the damn theater up, that kind of thing.
Who was the director of that workshop?
Harry Dolan.
Harry Dolan. Some very, very well-known artists supported that workshop, gave money to it.
Some very well-known artists came out of the Watts Writers Workshop. You know, Glenn Tubman, Yaphet Kotto. Sidney Poitier used to come down there and give a class. Sammy Davis Jr. used to come down there all the time. Quincy Jones used to come there and give music classes. We had our own 8-track studio setup for sound. We had our own sound room there.
Was part of your other activities and responsibilities to study the profiles of celebrities who were supportive of organizations?
Definitely, and especially, like I said, psychological backgrounds, weaknesses and strengths. Did he have a weakness for blondes? Did he have a weakness for money? Did he snort cocaine? Did he smoke marijuana? They even get into, and that's one thing the Bureau loves, is their sexual background. They have files and files on different blacks, not only celebrities, but a lot of others, sexual activity.
We've seen a number of investigations into the assassination of Martin Luther King. We've seen an extended police trial of the assassination of Malcolm X. What you seem to say substantiates what many black people say out on the street, that government agents or agencies knew that these assassinations were brewing and either participated in them or allowed them to take place.
It would behoove black people, it would behoove all people, really, to question so-called the cut and dry one lone assassin theory. The Bureau and other intelligence agencies are very good at conspiracies. They are very good at setting people up to be killed. They are very good at making innuendos so the person will be killed.
Something else was used against the students that drove the final nails into the coffin, killing the movement.
What stopped it, of course, almost dead in its track, and not by any accident, was a widespread and deliberately organized widespread use of drugs. And the decision was to concentrate the distribution of drugs on the black youth of the nation, starting in New York. Beginning in the elementary school, and that to punish, even on the pain of death, any of the distributors who invaded the white community or predominantly white schools. That New York and other large cities were to be divided up into districts. The district commander, black, was to be given any kind of car he wanted, Mercedes, Rolls Royce, anything, because this would be a part of the sales pitch. Said blacks just love fine cars, and he'd drive around through the community in his fine car, and some of his key assistants, and he'd be identified, he'd be known, and that sort of stuff. And so the stories, I'm not going any further into it. But thus it began, and the spread over the country, and we fell for it. Now, one thing was important, that the thing to attract the blacks, more than any other thing, more than the drug itself, but to spread the word, have a number of key young people in it, and to spread the word that this is the end thing. So that'll get them. Just say it's the end thing, and they'll brave the fires of hell to be a part of the end thing.
In spite of the fact that J. Edgar Hoover is no longer with us, we have some J. Edgar Hoover types, and they do what they can to make sure that the opportunity for self-expression is denied.
I believe in the idea of amnesty for those who have put down roots and who have lived here, even though some time back they may have entered illegally.
In this series, Webb alleged that Nicaraguan Contras were responsible for the Los Angeles crack cocaine epidemic of the 1980s. He also claimed that the CIA knew of these operations and, at the very least, ignored them. At worst, he alleged they actually covered up the crimes. With extensively documented sources, Gary Webb built a case that argued the Contras were able to somehow get cocaine into the U.S. and get cash out much more easily than other drug-running organizations. Without having to pay the cost of transportation, the Contras were able to sell cocaine at bargain basement prices. Webb claimed that this cheap cocaine flooded the market, enabling the crack epidemic. While these allegations were severe, they were not far-fetched. In South and Central America, it's not unusual for revolutionary groups to use the drug trade as a way to raise money. Other groups such as FARC and the Shining Path have both employed similar strategies. Yet why were the Contras able to move their product with such ease? According to Gary Webb, it's because they had the support of the CIA. Webb never claimed that the CIA provided outright assistance to the Contras, but he did claim the CIA had knowledge of this drug trade for some time. Why on earth would an agency of the US government allow criminals to bring drugs into the country? To Webb, it was a matter of realpolitik. The money the Contras generated from the drug trade allowed them to wage war in Nicaragua, attempting to overthrow the leftist Sandinista government. Supporting the Contra army was so important that the CIA also prevented the Department of Justice and the DEA from prosecuting several known Contra smugglers. The Reagan administration had already established a precedent for this behavior by tolerating drug trafficking, as long as the trafficking benefited the Contras. Additionally, later CIA investigations partially vindicated Webb's findings.
Outside a correctional facility just a few miles from the U.S. Congress, prison guards and rights activists gathered to speak out against the continued privatization of prisons throughout the U.S.
We actually want to see the private prisons stopped. Go back to the public prisons that are safe, where you've got an adequate staffing level within the institutions. The prisoners are treated with respect. They're treated the way they're supposed to be treated, instead of this warehousing of bodies. I mean, that's basically all the private prison does.
The Corrections Corporation of America, or CCA, is a multi-billion-dollar company and the largest private prison provider in the country. From the country's inception 30 years ago, the U.S. prison population has jumped 500%. Behind me is one CCA facility, which is celebrating its 30th anniversary this week and is coming off the heels of a judicial scandal in which a Pennsylvania judge was found guilty of sending children to prison in exchange for money from privately run prisons. Stories like this illustrate a major problem with modern prison privatization.
Instead of incentivizing rehabilitation, getting people back into the community in a way where they can pursue good livelihoods, it creates an incentive to keep people inside and to just keep making money off of filling those beds.
Over 2 million inmates currently serve in U.S. prisons, mainly due to the controversial war on drugs and immigrant detentions, resulting in overcrowding and overspending by federal and state governments. Other controversies also surround the prison industrial complex.
There are a number of studies showing that violence is higher in for-profit prisons than in public prisons. There's higher turnover in staff, and in many cases, the way that they turn a profit is by cutting necessary programs and staffing within the prison.
I discovered that most of what I thought I knew about the criminal justice system was sheer myth. Here are the facts, a few of the facts I uncovered in the course of my work that I describe in the book. More African American adults are under correctional control today in prison or jail, on probation or parole, than were enslaved in 1850, a decade before the Civil War began. And today, a black child born today has less of a chance of being raised by both parents than a black child born during slavery. Now, this is due in large part to the mass incarceration of black men. There was an interesting article published in The Economist magazine about this not too long ago, entitled How the Mass Incarceration of Black Men Harms Black Women. And in the article it described that the majority of black women in the United States, including about 70% of black professional women, are unmarried, and that this is due largely to the mass incarceration of black men, which takes them out of the dating pool at the years they would be most likely to commit to a partner, to raising a family. But what's worse is that by branding them criminals and felons, they're rendered permanently unemployable in the legal job market for the most part, virtually guaranteeing that most of them will cycle in and out of prison, sometimes for the rest of their lives. In this way, mass incarceration has decimated black families to a degree comparable to slavery.
A recent report by the U.S. Sentencing Commission shows that over the last 5 years, African-American men have been getting longer prison sentences than white men. And that same report says men getting longer sentences are getting them longer rather than women. While it does not address why judges hand out the longer sentences, Attorney General Eric Holder said last week the numbers disturb him. Speaking in New York, Holder said it's time to ask fundamental questions about our nation's criminal justice system. So tonight, the Face Off guys address their own question about who should really address this issue of disparity.
Well, Matt, many in this country are angry with the Attorney General Eric Holder for standing up at a convention and telling the truth. He said that there's a problem in America with its criminal justice system when statistics show from the Department of Justice that black men who commit the same crimes as white men get sentenced to prison longer than white men do. But that's not a surprise to any of us. We've always known in this country that racism has been dealt to black men and black people and people of color in the criminal justice system. That's why so many of us protest against it and are angry with it, because only those who have the complexion for the protection get the benefit from the criminal justice system.
You know what? Eric Holder should be in jail. And quite frankly, we'll take a couple of those black adults, those black men that you're complaining about, take one or two of them out. Let's put Eric Holder in jail, because there's a guy that deserves to be in prison. But how do you know? How do you know if a judge is racist or not? You know what, Quanell, if there is a problem, and I wouldn't disagree with you that it certainly seems as though black adults seem to be spending more time in prison than whites. We've heard that before. Then why doesn't somebody do something about it? Eric Holder should be in prison. He's got Russell Simmons, Kim Kardashian, Lil Wayne. You know why nobody pays attention, Quanell? Because those people no one's going to listen to. They're entertainers.
Matt, whether you like it or not, the facts present the facts. And the truth is, black men are being sentenced to prison much longer than white men for the same crimes and same criminal backgrounds. At the end of the day, that is racism.
Okay,
that's
Quanell.
the only thing that's the root of it.
All right. Let's assume you're right. Let's just say you're right. Eric Holder, no one's going to listen to because that guy should be in jail. Kim Kardashian, Lil Wayne, Sharpton. Get somebody talking about it that people can believe, Quanell.
No, Matt, see, what you all want is some pacified, sissified, homogenized, overfried Negro leader to say what you all want to say about the subject matter, so you all are not threatened. At the end of the day, black leaders should stand up, Hispanic leaders and white leaders who believe in God and the truth.
Let me tell you something.
And tell America this is wrong.
You don't
me. Sentence black men longer
listen to
because
you
they're strictly black.
At me. You can threaten me all you want,
Threaten you.
LX, and it's not going to make me
Threaten
attention to you.
Let me tell you something.
Want to threaten
white
me?
men,
I'm not going to listen to what you say.
men are being sentenced less than black men. Those are the facts. Let's do something about it.
Okay.
That's the bottom line.
Okay. Then get somebody to stand up that I can listen to, other than Eric Holder, Kim Kardashian, and Lil Wayne.
We are not going to allow you conservative Tea Party members to tell our community who should speak for our community. At the end of the day, everybody should speak the facts. And the facts is there's racism in the criminal justice system, and black men are being sentenced disproportionately than white men. Something must change that, whether you like it or not.